Welcome back to Trad Man, everybody. Jason, I can't tell you how good it is to have you back, dog. I have missed you. Man,
yes, it's been a while. I've been out busy. I've had my highs and lows, but yeah.
You had a sore throat thing that I don't know, must be going around because I kind of got it after you did. And for this past weekend, I mean, I sounded like Ethel Merman after she smoked 10,000 cigarettes.
Well, just for clarification, we weren't smooching or anything, so you didn't get it from me. I just don't want people to confuse.
You know, that. Jason, this isn't the confessional, so nobody needs to know. You know, no, we're close. We ain't that close, bro.
Yeah.
We have a great episode for you guys today. You know, we talked before in one of our previous episodes about how we want to go through all 23 of the Eastern Catholic rites and particular churches just to show you guys, like, for those of you who aren't sort of initiated into Eastern Catholicism, just how big and beautiful this thing we call the Catholic Church really is. And when I first discovered it, I remember I was like, I was completely blown away. I'm still blown away because I'm always learning something new about the Eastern churches and the spirituality of the East that continues to resonate with me. But before we get too deep into it, we're going to start off with a prayer. And our two guests that are joining us today, James and Heath, are Byzantine Catholics from the Ruthenian Rite. But if they are going to be very patient with me and Jason and pray the way we do in the Roman Church, just because I don't have a good Byzantine Catholic prayer book. But if you guys know of one that I should have, leave it in the comment section and I'll go buy it for next time. So let's say a quick prayer to the Holy Ghost so that we can get some wisdom, some enlightenment on this subject, and that we can come to know the fullness of God's greatest revelation that he ever gave to humanity, which is the Catholic Church. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Veni Sancti Spiritus, repletur da corda fidelium, et tui amoris in eis ignem accende. Imite spiritum tuum et creabuntur.
Et renovavis facem terre.
Oremus. Deus qui corda fidelium Sancti Spiritus illustratione docuisti, da nobis in iodum spiritu recta sapere, et de eos semper consolatione gaudere, per Christum Dominum nostrum. Amen.
Amen.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. James and Heath, thank you guys so much for coming on our little show. James,
pleasure to be here.
Well, let me introduce you guys one at a time, so that we can do this justice. James, you and I met in the green room just before this episode, where you were very quick to tell me that you have published no books on this subject and you are not an expert. Is that correct?
That is correct. I we'll take no him degree out. Or credentials of any kind.
Okay, so we'll kick him off the show. Where's the button?
I think James is being a little bit humble from what Heath has told me about him. I think he's
that bow tie.
He's knowledgeable in this,
doesn't it? Yeah,
that's right.
James, I'm having trouble looking at the show and figuring out which one is me and which one is you.
Twins. You gotta pints with Aquinas mug.
I'm gonna call my mom and be like, anything you want to tell me? I'll be like, it's too late, Mom. We met. Okay.
Yep. Secret's out.
I don't know, but half the Irishmen look alike anyway.
So, wow. All right.
Hey, I'm Irish too. I'm just a brown-headed Irish.
You people,
gingers have no souls, right? We're all clones.
And then Heath also comes to us from the pews, the non-experted lay pews where Jason and I, quite frankly, dwell for sure. And he also comes to us. Now, both of you guys are Ruthenian Rite Catholics, correct?
On the way. I haven't made the jump yet. Yeah, it's complicated.
Okay, and we're going to get into that. I really do want to get into that because one of the things that I've always loved about the Ruthenian Rite Catholic is that they're fully Catholic. They're fully in communion, so I could go there and receive the sacraments, of course, if I'm properly disposed in the state of grace, and I could go there and I could receive Holy Communion. But if I wanted to make that my parish, like, that's a mission, right? It's not just I'm going to fill out the card over here and now I'm Byzantine Rite.
You don't canonically change rites, but you can be a member of the parish, and that's kind of the situation that I'm in.
Yes, both of us.
It's a little more complex because of my 3 children. I've been attending the Eastern Rite now off and on for 10 years. But of my 3 children, my youngest was born while we were members of an Eastern parish in Washington State, where we used to live. And when she was born, we had her baptized, chrismated, and received First Communion in the Eastern Rite, which when we moved away and went to Latin Rite parishes, and we've got this little girl who's very obviously not 7 years old expecting to go forward for communion, it created some issues sometimes.
Sure.
So there was some confusion, but my older 2 boys they still have not received confirmation yet because they were baptized Latin Rite, and we've got 1 foot in the East and 1 in the West. It's a mess, but it's a beautiful mess, and it's great to be able to be canonically Latin in an Eastern Rite parish. I am planning a trip with Father to the seminary in Pittsburgh, probably early next year. We've been talking about, my discerning the diaconate program. So I will have to write a letter to our bishop here in Houston, who, Lord forgive me, but I don't know
Cardinal DiNardo.
DiNardo, thank you. I've just moved to Houston last year. I'll use that as an excuse. And then Bishop Gerald, you basically write a letter to both of them and explain why you want to change rites. And then as the father, once I change rite, my kids basically come along with me. And
interesting.
Okay. Yeah.
Just kind of off topic, I saw Father the other day over at our parish fall festival.
Oh, Father Tom?
I saw Father Tom over there.
He's great.
Yeah, and I just wanted to kind of back up for a minute, just to talk about, because Mark had talked about the fullness of the East and the West. And, I think many Latin Rite Catholics, through no fault of their own, really aren't familiar with the Eastern rites. And I don't know that I would have been either if it wasn't for Heath, and just to say a quick word about Heath to kind of give our background. Both me and Heath are converts, right? And we come from a similar background. And I consider Heath he's become one of my really good friends. I feel like he's a brother in many ways. And but anyway, when
you got to be careful, Keith. When somebody pays you a compliment, there's usually a double edge.
Yeah,
so you want something in return.
There's something coming. No, but yeah. So me and Heath met, and Heath and even Mark and stuff. Heath is in the same boat that I was. We lost a lot of friends through our conversion, but as they say, God takes and God gives. And I feel like and many of the friends that I have since my conversion is tenfold what I had before. And I say all that because I met Heath through that. And if it wasn't for Heath, I don't know that I would have, at least up to this point in my, living my Catholic life, that I would have attended St. John Chrysostom, which is the Byzantine Catholic Church here in Houston. Because he was going there at the time with Father Elias, and he said, "Hey, why don't you come over one Sunday?" So we went over, and yeah, it was different, but it was. We talked about the richness and fullness. You could just see that it was fully Catholic. They believe, of course, the same things like we've mentioned in our intro, but the icons and the iconostasis and the bells.
It's the first place
and
I've
the
ever
incense.
seen an icon
It's just beautiful.
of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and it's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's incredible. And so, yeah,
and the cool thing about St. John Chrysostom here in Houston is they have it's a first class relic there, right, guys? That you have at the parish there, so you can actually go see a first class relic of St. John Chrysostom here in Houston and touch your scapular to it, your rosary, or whatever the case may be. But yeah, we have a beautiful church here in Houston.
So I got to say something to both Jason and Heath, because growing up my whole life in the Catholic Church, I never really thought much about people who convert. And then like recently I had this really kind of weird crisis of faith where I was like, I'm going to have to become Orthodox. I just know it. I just know that the Catholic Church is going to force me into something that I can't go with. And I'm just going to have to end up doing this or whatever. And I was to the point where I told my wife, I said, we're going to go check out a Western Orthodox church. So it'll look pretty much like the Latin Mass, except it won't be exactly the Roman Mass, but I guess that's the best we can do. I actually told my wife that. It was quite scandalous. I had to go to confession for telling my wife that, but I started to think about all the things I'm going to have to do when you convert. How are you going to explain it to your friends? How are you going to explain it to your family? How are you going to, I'm going to have to write the Knights of Columbus and resign being a Knight of Columbus. All my friends from the church are going to want to know what the heck is going on with Mark. It's the fact that Jason and Heath did that because they loved the truth that much. I mean, it really impresses me. And, you know, I think God has a very big reward stored up for both of you.
Well, Heath is definitely a treasure for the Catholic Church and just his knowledge and all that. And I'm not going to tell any of his personal stuff and all that, of course, but I'll just say that my sacrifices compared to Heath, I stand.
Heath, let's get into that.
In a giant.
Well, let's get into that. I mean, Heath, you convert to the Catholic Church from what, may I ask?
We were in the Restoration movement.
What is that? I'm a little unfamiliar.
It's 1820s is basically when it started. This
is like tent revival stuff, right?
Tent revival stuff, yes. Kind of Presbyterian Baptist mashup. And there's a lot of pioneer stuff going on too. And, you know, people were having a hard time getting clergy and stuff. So they kind of did an open communion. Everybody's welcome. We're going to unite all the churches into one church. And so there was this idea of unity. And then, of course, over a few decades, they broke up into smaller groups themselves. And Jason and I were part of the same movement, but we were actually in
our church is split.
So it's interesting. Okay.
It's kind of weird because it's like before, like he and I wouldn't have even had communion together, even though we were both about unity. But now as Catholics, we can finally.
The Catholic Church has brought us together.
Yeah, the Catholic Church.
So you start out
the OG restorationists.
That's right.
So you start out in a branch of evangelical Protestantism that I would argue finds its origins, you know, in the United States, like you said, the turn of the.
Oh, absolutely, it does.
Right. So you start going east. You get to you go to Rome, which I know for those folks is you might as well be a Martian Catholic, right? And then you keep going further east. That's interesting. How did you end up at the Byzantine Catholic Church of all places?
Well, it's a very long story, really. And before I get into it too much, James is also a convert, so I'm sure he's.
Oh, are you?
I didn't know that. Okay,
I didn't know that. The first time ever, I've got one back on the shelf here. My wife and I told our story. It was published in the prestigious Parish Neighbors of Spring and Klein. Parish Newsletter. Right, but it's the first time we've ever actually written it down. I've told bits and pieces on stage and in various places, but never tried to, sort of gave an overview. And I really kept it short, so they're publishing it over 2 episodes. That's the short version, right? But yeah, we've had quite a journey, and I think the most important thing is God has been there with us all the way, because I'm dense and I don't take subtle hints very well. So I've had a few times when I've just openly asked, all right, God, if this is what you want, you're going to have to hit me upside the head and make it really clear. And be careful what you pray for, because you just might get it.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that many converts of the Catholic faith go fighting, kicking, and screaming, because it's not something you want to do, but eventually you're convicted. You're like, what choice do I have if I want to please God? It's not like something that you really seek out, like, oh, I want to be Catholic, because among many Protestant, that's the whore of Babylon. I mean, you stay far away from it. And so
that was the environment that Jason and I were in. I don't know about you, James, but same thing. Pope is the Antichrist, and all this kind of stuff in the whore of Babylon is the Catholic Church. And
by the way, that's never concerned me. And I know people get all upset about that. You hear what those Protestants are saying about us, and I would say, well, yeah, they're Protestants. Who do you think they're protesting? Exactly.
Right.
Islam? I don't think so.
Right.
Well,
I guess in a sense, but
I to try to swing us back here, because I want to put this book away too, because it's kind of cluttered me over here. But some of the notes that I took, I just a brief history, and you guys, if I say anything wrong or you want to add something, just jump in. But we talk about it being the Ruthenian Byzantine Catholic Church. I guess here in the U.S., it's just typically called the Byzantine, but there are actually subsets to the Byzantine Rite. But most of them all practice the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom. And I think I even read earlier somewhere that the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom was actually the divine liturgy of the Church of Holy Wisdom at one point. And,
patriarch.
Yeah. And, one thing that I found interesting, I'm like, well, how did they come up with the name Ruthenian Catholic? Where did that come from? But apparently at one point in, the 8th and 9th centuries, I guess, there was a conglomerate of people called the Rusin people who made up areas like Poland or in Hungary and Slovakia, Romania, and Ukraine. And it wasn't until Saint Cyril and
Methodius. Yeah.
Methodius.
Cyril Methodius. You got it.
Yeah. Saint Cyril's and Methodius came in the 9th century and converted the Slavic people there. And that's kind of how we were. And then from there, of course, you had the Great Schism, to which they went with the Orthodox. But I guess around the 1600s or so, they came back into communion with the Catholic Church. Is that a pretty fair assessment on the history of them, you think?
Sure. That's a quick and dirty.
Yeah, quick and dirty.
Yep. Yeah, basically went. We're kind of split off due to geography and politics, and then came back to Rome.
Yeah. Well, so if let's say if there's somebody who's listening to this who has no idea what we've been talking about since the moment we said Ruthenian Rite, if I want you to imagine what you believe a Greek Orthodox liturgy or church looks like, okay? And you walk into that and you say, okay, I'm obviously in an Orthodox church. But what if you weren't? What if you were instead actually in a Catholic church?
Ruthenian Greek Catholic Church.
The same, with all the same, they have the same Pope we have. They have different bishops that govern their particular rites, but they're part of the same church as you, that you can go to communion at their church. They can go to communion in yours. That's essentially what we're talking about. So if you've never been exposed to this before, you could walk into a Ruthenian Byzantine Catholic Church and say, well, this looks very Eastern Orthodox.
Make you a little nervous.
Well, tell me a little bit about why does it look so Orthodox?
Because
great question.
Liturgical traditions developed differently. I mean, even within the Latin Rite, there are some different branches of the Roman Rite. Now, most of those have all been kind of folded up into the Rite we have now. But there's this great chart online that shows all of the branches and the different rites. So I could be wrong in this because I'm going from memory. I was going to try to look it up, but I think there's the Gallican, the
Galician, there's Galician, Ambrosian,
Galician. Yep. The
use of Sarum, Mozarabic, yeah.
Man,
there were a lot of
unless you hear
Western
somebody say it out
rites.
loud, you have no idea how to pronounce says. Like I'm terrible with that.
Oh,
yeah, there were a lot of Western rites. So
there were a lot of Western rites in the church, and
right?
Even still are to this day. But
yeah, and there's some distinctives that are not exactly different rites, like the Novus Ordo and the TLM and the Charismatic movement. They present very, very differently. But one thing that all of those churches and the Byzantine Ruthenian Rite, we've got Ukrainian Catholic Church here in Houston as well. I think there's Melkites. I think there's a Syro-Malabar parish here too. Like we've got so many rites right here in Houston. It is incredible.
I think we even have an Armenian. I believe so.
Wow. Yeah. I don't. I do not.
Were we talking about that, Mark?
Maronite and Maronite.
Yeah, it's not often you find Armenian Catholics outside of Armenia. I mean, you can find Armenian Orthodox pretty much everywhere, but
maybe I'm wrong on that. I thought we did.
Some of the Catholic rites are still very regional. America's weird. Most of these churches developed the way that they developed because of geography, because of their tradition and their history. Developed as a valid tradition from the other apostles. It's a valid history that they have. But due to distance and language, they just kept they grew separately, right? But one thing that everybody has in common is you will find a picture of Pope Francis hanging, usually in the nave or in the front of the church, maybe in the back. You'll find a picture of Pope Francis hanging somewhere. You will very clearly hear, as long as the liturgy is in a language that you understand, you will hear the prayers for our bishops and including and especially our Holy Father.
So are the, at least the Ruthenian Rite, is that typically just done in the vernacular of the location? And has that been historically the case?
As far as I'm aware, yeah, I think so. I don't think there was, to my knowledge, and I very well could be corrected, but to my knowledge that historically there wasn't the issue with in the Ruthenian Rite, there's Church Slavonic is to the Ruthenian Rite what Latin is to the Roman Rite, basically. And
Church Slavonic is a very cool looking language, by the way. I'm going to put some of it up here.
Is.
I can't read it, but I've heard it being spoken, and just to look at the words, I mean, it's a very, very cool language.
It's kind of similar to Russian, kind of similar to Polish, kind of similar to Ukrainian. Like there's some definite overlap there.
And they're all difficult languages in their own right to learn, at least for English speakers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I don't think that there was really that problem that we have had in the West.
Okay.
Well, and the Ruthenian Church is a little different than those other Orthodox churches because, and indeed, I think even than many of the other Eastern Catholic rites, in that it's not a national. It's not a national church. Like the Serbian Orthodox Church looks the way it is because it is primarily for Serbians. It comes from Serbia. Even though it's Orthodox, it will look distinctly Serbian or it will look distinctly Russian or something like that. But the Ruthenian Rite is sort of gets the spirituality from that Slavic region of the world, but you would find people
country.
Right. And most of the people who go there necessarily are not going to be, Ruthenian Slavic people, right?
Well, especially here in the U.S. I mean, I think that's definitely the case up until, from what I've heard from priests that have had conversations with, that up until probably around the 1980s, 1990s, even that recently, it was still very much populated by people of Slavic heritage. But after the 90s, we just started seeing a lot more plain old Americans coming into the church, right? People who are attracted to the
Irish.
Yeah, exactly.
Heath, when you first were exposed to because we're going to talk about liturgy. And if anybody knows anything about this show, we are big and heavy into liturgy. We love the liturgy and the various liturgical expressions of Catholicism throughout the centuries. Heath, the first time you are exposed to the Divine Liturgy, take us through that for a moment. I mean, you'd been to a Roman Rite Mass before, I'm assuming at this point, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So the first time you're exposed to that Ruthenian Rite Divine Liturgy, walk us through that experience. I'm curious as to coming from your Protestant background, that had to have been something very unique.
By the time I actually went to my first Divine Liturgy, I had already been received into the Latin Church, so I was Catholic at the time.
Okay.
While I was going through RCIA, I was also taking iconography class at St. John Chrysostom with Father Elias. And just to answer your question from earlier, coming into the church, in all the reading that you're just trying to digest all this new stuff, there is that phrase from Pope St. John Paul II about breathing with both lungs. And so I really took that very much to heart. I'm a missionary kid as well. My folks were missionaries in West Africa. So I've always been interested in the different cultures and expressions of the faith.
Absolutely.
And I was very interested in how the Catholic Church was handling, this kind of diversity and things like that of different cultures. And so I was able to receive, as I went. I was still a new Catholic, but if I could describe how I felt, I was a little confused, and I was overwhelmed, and I saw a lot of reverence. And as I tried to participate, it felt like this really awesome prayer that I was just entering into, almost another world. And I would just say I was hooked from the very first time I went.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can really put it into words.
First thing I always notice is the smell. I walk into a Byzantine Catholic Church, and that incense, I mean, it makes me feel like I have just crossed a threshold into some place where the living God is present. And, it takes me into a completely different mindset.
Let me add just a quick personal story, because and I don't even know if I've ever told Heath this. So you talked about how some people they could easily confuse. They've walked into an Orthodox church, right? So when I was in my conversion process, Heath was going to the Byzantine church here in Houston, right? And somebody said, I haven't seen Heath in a while. And somebody said, yeah, I think he's kind of exploring the Orthodox church or something over there. And at the time, I didn't know any better. I'm like, what? I don't think he's doing that. But yeah, I mean, to your point, because of their heritage, yeah, you can, see that. One thing that I do think is interesting about the Byzantine Catholic Church here, the Ruthenian as well, is you talked about liturgy. They have 3 liturgies. And I'd like to kind of discuss those a little bit more if you guys can, because I know you have the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, which is the one that's mainly used. You have the liturgy of St. Basil, which is used, I believe Heath had mentioned to me, during the Great Lent. Is that correct? And then you have the one of, is it St. James?
St. James.
Yeah. So, I mean, can you guys speak?
I think that's only used like twice, maybe. I have one of the liturgy books behind me here, although
on his feast day, I think it's used.
Yeah. Is there any major differences in them, or are they pretty similar?
They're remarkably similar.
Okay.
They're longer. I mean, even the liturgy of John Chrysostom is typically around 80 to 90 minutes, right? You're not going to find Eastern Rite Catholics who are showing up to liturgy, right? Like looking at their watches, getting ready to go watch the football game on a Sunday, right? Like that's just, they just don't mix, because it's not the same amount of time each time, right? It just depends on what's going on. But you get, I think, Heath, correct me if this is different, but I think with St. Basil, you're going to be like an hour and a half, maybe hour 40 minutes, but the Liturgy of St. James is like 2 hours.
Yeah. Yeah. So St. John's the short version for people with short attention spans.
Right. Yeah, it's only 90 minutes.
Well, and another thing I've noticed that is that liturgical postures are different in the various different rites of the church. Now, St. John Chrysostom that is just near our house where I live.
Have I been saying that wrong? Is it Chrysostom or
I've heard it both. I've heard it both ways.
Yeah, you'll hear it both ways. A good friend of mine always would say John Chrysostom rhymes with awesome, and that hits stuck in my head. I don't care. I don't even care if that's the wrong pronunciation. It's awesome, John Chrysostom.
Anthony over at Avoiding Babylon what does he call it? St. John Chrysanthemum.
Oh, I don't know. He's from New York.
Shout out to Avoiding Babylon. Love you guys.
Cousin of John Rhododendron.
Yeah. I noticed though that kneeling is not. I mean, they do have kneelers in the church, but kneeling is not a big liturgical posture in the East. I've noticed.
And pews are a relatively new addition, correct as well,
yeah,
right?
It's not. Yeah, there has been some Latinization that's happened in all of the Eastern rites in America, especially, and it can be a sore point for some people. Now, in Washington State, when we were attending St. George, and if you want to look into, for those watching at home, if you want to look into a great, easy book, Father Daniel Gordon Dozier, who is the pastor there at St. George in Olympia, wrote a book for Catholic Answers. It's just 20 questions on Eastern Catholicism. It's a great little primer.
We'll put a link to it in the description.
What was great there is they had built. So this was one of the usually Eastern parishes. And I don't know how many of you visited Heath. I've had the opportunity to see. At my last job, I traveled a lot, so I've had the opportunity to visit Eastern parishes all over the U.S. and I think one even in Canada. And most of them have pews because they either bought out an old church, right, or they're a mission parish who's meeting at a Latin Rite church, or sometimes, and not infrequently, you'll find like they're literally house churches. Like they'll buy a house and convert the house.
I've seen that.
That's also really common. But the what makes sense liturgically is not to have pews, maybe to have some chairs for the elderly or the sick, or children who complain about standing too long. But usually you just have carpet. The chairs are around the edge, and people just kind of stand in knots. And then you've got standing, you've got and Heath, you serve, so you probably know the terms much better than I do. You've got the small bow, more profound bow, and then you have a full, I think it's a metany, where you go all the way down and touch the ground, or a full prostration where you're just like, kind of similar to if you've seen Islamic prayer, where they're down on hands and knees, right? That's more common. And the one thing I love about churches that don't have pews is that my wife and I were just talking about this. It's great with children because the children in parishes, once you remove the pews, the kids they'll orbit around like this toddler Oort cloud that just or like if you've ever seen children, if you've ever gone to a department store with children, not that there's many department stores left, but where they have all the clothing racks and the kids are like going in and around the clothing racks, right? But the clothing racks in this case are like families who are standing together in the liturgy, and the kids are just kind of like milling about, and everybody's fine with it. It's this.
It's not disruptive.
Because everybody's singing the whole time. There's not a lot of silence.
Right.
Yeah.
So
that's what I noticed about the children too when I went. I guess it's just a cultural thing as far as churches go, because of course in the Latin church, I know myself as well, of course we kneel a lot at low mass, at the Latin mass and all that, but even at the Novus Ordo there's still a lot of kneeling and whatnot and sitting. but you're constantly trying to get your kids to sit still and do, you know, especially the young ones, sit still, do this. And like when you pray the rosary at home, you try to, in a way, use that as practice for sitting at least, you know. But yeah, when I was there, it was kind of a shocker to me because I'm over here like, okay, stand right here, don't move. And then I see other kids just kind of walking around, and it's not disruptive, and it's just, you can tell that that's just the way it is. You know, that's the way they do it. And I really thought that was awesome for the kids because, yeah, like you said, kids at that age, you know, as they say, God put the wiggle in the kids, you know. So to a certain extent, I feel like sometimes I get frustrated with my kids too much during Mass, and I have to remind myself, okay, look, I mean, there's obviously a line. I can't let them be disruptive, but at the same time, God has made them with this energy, you know, put this wiggle in them. I don't need to just completely smash it out, you know, within reason, of course. But again, it's just I guess it's just a cultural difference in the churches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you guys? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and the wiggle in the kids. That's something that is the Eastern liturgy really involves adults, of course, too, but it really involves children because there's so much you're participating, you're singing, you're bowing, you're constantly involved in something. There are little traditions like when Father brings the consecrated host, when Father brings the Eucharist in a procession around up to the front, there's tradition of reaching forward and touching his robe, harkening back to scripture where the woman with the hemorrhage touched the robe of Christ and was healed. There's what's the name of the three-pronged candle? There's this special candle that usually the kids will hold during they'll light and they'll extinguish, and they'll hold it during certain prayers. So children have lots of opportunities to be involved and engaged, which
that's awesome.
I've got a child who's a little on the spectrum, right? And when we went to Mass, right? So we were in the Latin Rite for about 2 years before we were introduced to the Eastern Rite. But he said he hated it. He had such a hard time holding still and kneeling and just could not handle it very well. And now, like, he just kind of left it alone for a while, right? But he just asked, not last week, he said, is there some kind of book where, we can pray like on the hours like the monks do? Is there something like that?
Wow,
that's awesome. Like, yep, we're doing it, buddy.
Oh yeah.
He's been leading prayers in the morning. He just comes downstairs, he goes and gets the book, and he just does it. I'm just like,
that's what I'm talking about.
What?
That's what I'm talking about.
That's not, I'd love to claim credit, but that's not like,
no, that's God.
Super parenting there at all. That's me getting out of the way.
Yeah,
sure.
And something else that is pretty cool with the children as well is, if I remember correctly, at least when they read the gospel, they have the children gather around. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Because when me and Heath were talking yesterday, well, Heath, I'll let you speak to what it symbolizes. I've done a lot of talking here, but I'll let you take credit for what you said.
One of the things I've heard is, let the little children come to me, and so when the deacon comes up to read the gospel, all the children will just kind of gather around, and then when the reading's done, pre-COVID, everyone would kiss the gospel, and he'd make sure everybody had a chance. All the kids got to touch the gospel, kiss it. Yeah. Now they kind of put it on their head as a blessing. And it's very interactive. In fact, to your point, I'd asked my kids before the show, I was like, so what do you guys like about the liturgy? And one of the things they said is just what James was saying. It's like, you're always chanting. So, I mean, you're just like always involved. There's all these, Lord have mercy, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, like all throughout. And so they kind of almost have like a game, they said, my kids, where they're like, is it time yet? Is it time yet? It like forces them to pay attention to what's going on. And of course, all the icons everywhere. There's this visual stimulation.
There's so much to look at.
The thurible.
I think that's something that I think that's something we got wrong about the Latin Church after Vatican II is we began to think that active participation just means doing stuff. But I think in the East, they really understood, no, it's doing the ritual. That's what we want you to actively participate in. It's not
as
just
a community.
Right. It's not actively participating in a rock concert. That doesn't do any, that's all fine for its time and place and everything. But here we want you to actively participate in the rite. So there'll be a lot of this. There'll be a lot of bowing. There's a lot of chanting. And when you do that, you get a real sense, okay, I'm actively participating in the rite that's going on here. It's not distracting. It's not out of place. It's, I don't want to go to mass because the music's really jamming. I don't know.
Well,
you don't necessarily get that in the East. It's like about 1,300 years old, give or take.
And the Jesus prayer, I was introduced to that, and I find myself saying that a lot, even at our Latin church when I'm going up for Holy Communion to receive. I will be saying that in my head just over and over because it's a short prayer that you can get in a good rhythm, and it really helps flush out and clear out everything around you. And one thing, we're talking about all the rituals and all that. One thing that is obvious, at least it was to me, was, when they would start crossing themselves, like in the Latin church, we go left or right. Well, all of a sudden you notice that you're out of sync with everybody because, I actually like the way that the Eastern Catholics do it. They hold their three fingers together to represent the Trinity, plus your other two fingers together down here represent
Homoousios, God and man.
Jesus fully God.
When he came down to earth, he tucked them in because he came down from heaven to earth.
And then they actually, if I understand right as well, they go right to left. They do the opposite, but that's actually the more ancient way that was done, like in the beginning, from some things that I have read. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't think it really matters one way or another. But
well, you just upset to all of our Russian listeners. I would like to apologize for my friend Jason, who just stepped in a land. You just kicked off a whole new Russian war.
Well, just listen. If the Russians are mad, we'll do an episode about the Russian-Ukraine war, and I'm sure I'll make them happy. But you do notice that. I mean, because like I said, it's obvious that you're out of sync. And I just really think that the way that they hold their hand posture really is a lot more beautiful than the way that we do it in the Latin. And I even find myself doing that sometimes. Just
when I pass an Eastern church, I'll usually make the sign of the cross in the Eastern way. They say when in Rome. Well, I think the opposite's true as well. So when
in Constantinople.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about the hand gestures thing, and there's this sort of liturgy war in the Western Church that's, it was solved for a while, but I guess we need to just rip that wide open again, and let's just do it all over again for some reason because of unity. That's right. I remember now. But anyway, in Russia, they had a same deal back. The Russian Patriarch Nikon, he wanted to Grecoize a lot of the Russian Orthodox Church. One of the things that he did is in the Russian Orthodox Church, you used to make the sign of the cross the same way you would do the same way a bishop would do a blessing, with the two fingers and the three fingers down here. Well, Emperor Nikon, or the Patriarch Nikon, changed that to the Greek way of doing it. That caused a split between what are called the old believers and the modern Russian Orthodox Church that continues to this day. In fact, the old saying is, if you scratch a Russian, you'll find an old believer. So it's just one of those things that, so you're saying about how the way you make the sign of the cross doesn't make a big deal. And I'm like,
well, maybe I'm too simple-minded. I just can't see that being a hill to die on. But
oh man, it was a really bad thing. In fact, they ended up keeping Nikon's all of his reforms, but posthumously they excommunicated him and called him. I mean, there's all horrible things. So.
Wow.
Yeah, a very interesting thing to look up, the Russian Old Believers. The Russian Orthodox Church is an interesting, multifaceted smorgasbord of stories.
and something else within the Eastern churches that really draws your attention, it seems to keep your attention, is when they're doing the incense. Because you know, in the Latin church, when they do the incense, you'll hear the chain clacking back and forth from the swings and all that. But in the Eastern churches, they have actual bells on there that constantly making noise. And it's not like, you know, sometimes people think, oh man, I get tired of bells ringing. That ain't the case with this. Like it adds so much to the liturgy and does help keep your attention, I would say. Is there any symbolism behind the bells about why the East does it and the West doesn't?
There's symbolism behind everything.
Well, it was kind of a rhetorical question, I guess. But
right. I've heard it with represented the apostles. Is that what you heard, James?
Yeah, there's one of there's different. There's the bells outside, and then there's the bells inside on the incense. There's it's either 12 bells with a 13th holder that's broken, or there's 11 with a 12th that's broken. That has the chain but no bell on it, which
obviously
you see exactly.
Yeah.
So everything has symbolism.
I had no idea about that. That's incredible.
Beautiful. Well, I can tell you, for me, the thing that makes or breaks good liturgy is music. And when, you know, obviously in the West, we have Gregorian chant, which is just, it calls to the soul. And I think that if you expose yourself to Eastern Christian patrimony, the Eastern hymns of the church, I mean, you will get that something about it. It tugs at the soul almost. And it really, it makes you want to pray is the only really way I know how to put it. I mean, and they're so different beyond, you know, within the different rites. Like I can go to the Melkite Divine Liturgy and there's something distinctly Palestinian Arabic about that, about their style of chant and things like that. And then the Ruthenian Rite is the same way. And the entire liturgy from start to finish was chanted in that incredible tone. So, and I was trying to find a way, and maybe in post-production, I can add some Eastern church music in the background that will give you a sense of that. Do any of you guys participate in the choir at all? Or is the whole parish basically the choir?
Yes. And yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know.
It's very much, there's the beauty is of a different kind. And before becoming Catholic, I was actually a worship leader, right?
Okay.
In the evangelical church. So I had a hard time with liturgical music, right?
Interesting.
Yeah, because I played guitar and there's either there was nowhere to be involved, or when I would see someone playing guitar in mass, it was just, I don't know. If I were 30 years older, it would be more my jam. But it's like the church modernized in the late 60s, early 70s, and forgot to update anything.
Tell us about it.
It just seems out of place. I know
Right.
I've been to some later masses at least twice in my life, at least at the church by my house, and that's when they have what they call the, I guess, more contemporary. Right. And yeah, I mean, I'm not speaking against the validity and all that of it. I don't believe it's invalid, but with the guitar and stuff like that, it does seem out of place. It seems like this is
very, very dated to continually just do hymns from the 70s and not do anything more modern. I've been to one parish. I probably visited close to maybe more than 100 dioceses. And I've only ever been to one parish where I think that they did it well. And it would be better if I looked up the name of the parish so I could tell the story better. But it was in Arizona. It was the church where Matt Mayer started and Life Teen started, right? They had guitars and drums, and it knocked my socks off. Like, it was reverent and it was modern. And I've never seen anything else like it anywhere. But they figured out how to mix modern instruments and Gregorian chant and make it work. But nobody else pulls it off.
I will remain skeptical of your claim until but I will entertain the idea, because I myself have witnessed things that
no man should see.
Well, no, I mean, I've witnessed formulations. I've witnessed incidences of the Novus Ordo that in some cases were more reverent than, maybe a diocesan TLM, but they're so rare and few and far between that I can name them on one hand. And I'm not here to bash the Novus Ordo, me saying I don't want to do that. I'm not the master of the church's liturgy, nor should I be. And I think the existence of the Eastern Catholic Churches proves what a good thing liturgical diversity actually is, and how well it can work. I want to talk about icons before we get too far away. There's two things I want to talk about. I want to talk about icons, and I want to talk about the Virgin Mary. But first thing I want to talk about icons. An icon, I would call it a two-dimensional pictorial representation of Jesus or of events in Jesus or the apostles or the saints' lives, but they're different than, like two-dimensional art you might find in a Western parish. Tell us a little bit about why icons are different and what the place they hold in Eastern Catholicism would be, because that's there's
a whole huge theology and iconography. I had the chance to take a couple iconography workshops with Father Elias, and he would just go so in depth. I don't know that I can remember most of it, but I would say even the creation of the icon itself is an act of prayer. The water is holy water that's used while it's being drawn or painted. That's an in-house debate there, but they make the icon and but the icon it goes from dark to light as the layers come on, and that's symbolic of the light coming into the darkness. And they're two-dimensional. They're not meant to look realistic. It's meant to invoke kind of a meditation and to draw you into the story or the life of the saint or what's going on there. So but there's so much about that. Yeah.
Well,
this guy's kind of an avant-garde. He was actually considered going out on the edge here when he made this one, but this is now a widely accepted icon.
The Russian iconographer Andrei Rublev painted this. This is not his actual icon. This is a like Heath was just saying. This is so widely accepted of an icon. There are almost innumerable sort of reproductions of this, but this is one of the icons that really got me into iconography. So, and I'll just give the audience kind of a quick seal on what makes icons so unique and special. We're talking about how there's symbolism and everything. This is an icon of the Holy Trinity, the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. And you can sort of tell, and I'll use my my cursor here, so you can tell that this one is the Father, because he's got the house behind him, and it talks about the Father's house. And the Holy Ghost here is represented. He'll have the mountain behind him because of all the places, especially in the Old Testament, that the Holy Ghost communicates on top of a mountain. Mount Sinai being one of the most iconic examples. And then, of course, you have God the Son represented by the tree in the back. So that's the cross that he was crucified on. And what's interesting, if you look here, there's an altar in the middle of them. And inside this chalice, it's kind of difficult to make this out, is the head of a lamb, right? So this is the Eucharist in this chalice. But if you look at the way that the other angels face each other, the God the Father and God the Holy Spirit here form a chalice shape. And in the middle of the chalice is Jesus the Son. This is a statement about the true presence. This is just one example. I mean, if you look at all the different icons that are out there, the theological statements bound up in just the way that they have their hands, I mean, is a whole catechesis. And so, and like Heath was saying, they're not sitting here just painting these like, you know, somebody, it's not Bob Ross, and we're going to put a happy little tree back here. These monks are, the monks and nuns have to get, you can't just be any Joe Schmo and make an icon. I mean, I'm sure you could for like, you just to see if you could do it, but it's not one they're going to hang in a church. You have to be an iconographer, and you have to have a certain level of piety. And they're sitting there praying the Jesus prayer or some other, you know, typically Eastern Catholic devotion while they're painting these icons. It is so incredible.
Yeah, I have behind me one that my wife painted, and she uses the term, I think, iconographic art, right? Or ecclesial art. But she specifically painted it without the traditional gold background and without
that's a really good job.
The characteristic features.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's amazing. I was married to her for 10 years and heard that, you know, it was too bad she didn't have any artistic ability. And then one day she just like started trying. And this was like, she's only been painting for like, I think it's probably been close to 5 years now, but this was like,
she's been holding out on you for those 10 years.
yeah, I know. I want more like this. Got to put her to work.
That's beautiful.
It has some of the elements, but she absolutely will not call this an icon, even though I have it next to my icon of Saint Irenaeus up there.
And I sent a couple of pictures of a couple of the major icons to Jason. It relates to iconography with liturgy. They're like when you come in most temples, you're going to see up above you, like in a dome or somewhere in the middle there, the Pantocrator, which is Christ, you know, with the.
Is this the one you're looking for?
That one. And that's another one you'll find in all of them. And this is back behind the wall of icons in the very back. This is
behind the altar.
Behind the altar. It's a Theotokos of the sign. And, you know, presenting her son, the Ark of the New Covenant, you know, all the symbolism there. In fact, the building is laid out sort of like the temple, with the iconostasis being like the veil. And back behind there being the fulfillment of the veil, which is the Eucharist, God's Christ. You know,
iconostasis is like it's like a
let's talk about that, because
wall of icons that separate the altar from the rest of the church. Really beautiful.
Yeah, and and at some point, if you've never been, they close the doors to it while the priest is what's the word I'm looking for? They stay open when he does the consecration, right? Or do they close them?
That's an iconostasis from St. Michael's Byzantine Catholic Church.
Yeah.
So you can see there's the door, the central door right there.
Yeah.
But the deacon will announce the doors, be attentive, and then I think Heath, you serve. I don't know if I know you're paying attention to other things, but do they close the doors during the consecration and then open them up as they come back out? I think that's the right order. Like they close the doors and then the doors are open. I do know that the iconostasis and the opening and closing of the doors is representative of the temple in Jerusalem, of the curtain, of the veil that was torn, and the iconostasis is not, even though there is still somewhat of a barrier there, it's not a complete barrier. Even with the doors closed, you could still see through. And in that picture of St. Michael's that you had up earlier.
Pull it up, Mark.
Yeah, I'm gonna pull it up.
You can still see like the beautiful woodwork that's there, and I have some pictures of the iconostasis, both from St. John Chrysostom and St. Basil's in Denver, and you can see that there are gaps, right? There are gaps and there are holes, so you're never completely closed off. It's just the mystery of. I don't know if we would use any other word than transubstantiation in the East.
Well, I think one of the things that Catholic liturgies do, and all of the really, I mean, the venerable rites have done this successfully, is you are going to be, when you are present at Catholic liturgy, you are going to be taken on a walking tour of salvation history. Yeah. So we're gonna start at the Old Testament and the creation of everything. We're going to go through so there is a point, just like the altar rail did in the Latin Church, where you're going to be reminded that at one point in human history, that barrier existed and it was real and you did not cross it. And then what is it that we do when we celebrate the Eucharist? We are physically, spiritually, mystically present at Calvary, in which those doors, those barriers are broken down, and they break down in the church for us as well.
Also, heaven is present. Heaven is present. So where you have the saints on the wall, if you notice, they're like looking out at you. So they're inviting you to come into heaven where they are celebrating the presence of Christ. So it's a representation of heaven coming to earth in a way as well.
That's beautiful. That is so beautiful.
I mean, everything is done with purpose, you know. Yeah, and speaking of the, you know, earlier I mentioned the consecration. You will also notice something different in the Eastern churches, where if you go to a Latin Mass, of course, you're going to do what the Latins have traditionally done. You're going to approach the altar rail, kneel, and receive on the tongue. Novus Ordo is a little bit different, of course. But in the Eastern churches, at least in the Ruthenian, you as you approach the priest, he will have do y'all call it a chalice with wine and leavened bread, not unleavened, but leavened bread, and they will scoop it out with a golden spoon, and you will receive that way. And then underneath you will have somebody holding, I know it's not called a towel, I know that's probably
like the paten, any of the terms are going to be Greek terms, which
the red cloth, but there's a Greek name for it.
Yeah. So when I say towel, I mean that in a very respectful way. I know that's not what it's called, but my language.
It wouldn't surprise me if it was just a Greek word for towel. I mean, really.
Yeah.
It wouldn't shock me at all.
There's a good view of the whole iconostasis, and of course the icons that will adorn every inch of wall spaces. If you know, as well, not every inch, but there's a lot of icons. So they're not just
if the parish can afford to, like, they'll end up getting there.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you, and I know that we don't promote the Orthodox on this show, but if you ever go to a Serbian Orthodox church, man, they have, I mean, every available inch of wall space is covered in an icon. I did want to show an interesting picture of what's behind the iconostasis. So let's take a look at this altar, because I think one of the things that the Latin Church tried to do in the wake of the Second Vatican Council was look to the east at their altar and say, well, they have like a freestanding table. So their rites are older than ours, so maybe that's the way we ought to be doing it, or something like that. But this is very different than I think what they tried to do in the West. I mean, I do see a freestanding table, but talk us through this. Let's take a look at this and figure out why this is different.
Well, I mean, the priest is going to be ad orientatum. You know, he's not going to stand on the other side of that table.
Right.
All sides are incensed. You know, the four corners of the earth. Everything is made holy. All of earth was sanctified by Christ. Is being sanctified. We're participating in that sanctification. But all the symbolism there, I mean, you could probably just write books about it. I just don't know.
I know, for example, see these little things right here that the acolytes will carry. Those represent the seraphim. Beautiful. I mean, and I remember the prayer before the what we would call the Sanctus, where it talks about all the angels and archangels, the cherubim, the seraphim, six-winged, many-eyed, singing aloft.
Yes. singing.
I mean, my mind was blown away by that. It's still blown away by that. That was the first time I remember thinking, boy, I don't know if I'd really like to see an angel.
Biblically accurate.
Well, they're always told, be not afraid.
Yeah, and then you notice the very first word every angel says in the Bible is "Don't be afraid."
Right.
Yeah.
You've got a bunch of eyes.
To that, yeah.
Yeah. So the other thing about from the altar that's kind of different too for the liturgy is they process to the left. There would be a preparation table where the bread is prepared. I sent Jason a link.
Yeah. Let me pull it up here because we were kind of talking about communion. I know we kind of jumped back and forth. That's my fault there. But yeah, I'll pull it both
with the gospel once at the beginning for the liturgy of the word. Then they process a second time with the elements before they're consecrated. It's during that time where people reach out and touch the hem of the garment.
Wow.
Take their prayers up to the table, symbolic of taking your prayers up to the. So that's the love. All of this has symbolism as well. A lot of times people at the parish themselves will make the bread, and so it's a very community event, a communal event.
And don't sometimes because I know I've been before where they have and they haven't. But where, of course, it's not consecrated bread, but where the people, I guess, that are making the bread, they will make bread for people to take home as well. Is that still? Is it? I mean, what's the tradition behind that?
And Titeron, there's a blessed bread that's been in there. They'll hand out at the end. It's like bread for the journey. Since COVID, they haven't done it.
There you go.
Right, which is unfortunate because my kids have been asking.
Yeah. But yeah, so this is before the whole liturgy starts. The priest is up there preparing the bread. He cuts it into all of these pieces for the 9 orders. The All Holy, that's for the Blessed Mother. The living and the dead are prayed for. A lot of times people will give lists to the priest to pray for certain people as they go up there. So as they're preparing the bread before the liturgy starts, they have these names in front of them that they're praying for different individuals, and they have all these things they're saying as they cut it open to the prayers of the saints. They're inviting all of heaven into this celebration at the beginning. And then these pieces are put into the chalice with the wine after the consecration.
And this looks like so. What are we looking at here? Is this like what was on the bread after it was finished, right? Yeah. So yeah. So if you see this, I guess this is kind of the blueprint per se, and then you have. Let me pull the other one back up here. And communion is received under both species, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what we were saying earlier. There it is. So yeah, you can see the same.
Oh yeah.
It's all in there. But yeah, when you of course, like we mentioned earlier, when you receive, it's I don't know the proper theological term. Is it intinction or whatever?
Yeah.
Where it's it's in the wine and they scoop it out with the spoon, and again you never touch the body of Christ. So it's a very reverent way of receiving, and they are very reverent, very aware of the fact of what they're doing. So it's not like it's just lackadaisical. And I think I've mentioned on the show before about one of the reasons I attend the Latin Mass. The same thing can be said for the Eastern churches as well, at least the Ruthenian, is the way they receive really reiterates to you and to your children the sacredness of what you're receiving.
Yeah.
Well, and I do know the Greek name for this is the prospera, right? The offering, the offering bread, and the way in which it's cut. And I don't remember the order well enough to be able to describe it here, but there's an order in which the cuts are made, and each cut is symbolic. Cut the square out, the heart, the center out, and then there's a cut in the side that symbolizes Christ's side being pierced, right? And there at every step there's symbolism, there are prayers that are said that are specific, and then yes, there's intinction. You have the chalice and the bread is mixed together. But one thing that's really interesting, because in the West, during the consecration, the priest will break the host and break pieces of the host, and there will be tiny fragments of the host in the chalice, right? Mm-hmm. So they're just like tiny particles usually. But my wife has developed a terrible autoimmune response to anything wheat-based. It's not just gluten. Low gluten hosts too are just terrible. But in the East, she can be accommodated. She went, I think, 2 years without being able to receive communion while we were.
Oh my goodness!
It was very. I don't want to get into it too much.
Sure.
It was very difficult for her and for both of us. But in the East, if we make arrangements with Father beforehand, and we've got a couple of people at our parish who do this, he is allowed to consecrate a separate chalice without mixing both species.
Interesting. Okay.
And he will bring out just the chalice. It's served the same way with the spoon, but it's just the precious blood. That way there's no exposure to wheat. I know people who have gluten sensitivities and low gluten hosts are just fine, but I think there's some here who it's something extra, right?
Yeah.
And that doesn't work for.
I've talked to a few of those people, and they're like, the low gluten host that's still too much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I know somewhat of the answer to it. So, but why leavened bread? Because I know growing up, Heath can attest to this from our faith tradition. We did receive, communion weekly, although symbolic. It was a requirement, right? We use unleavened bread because that's what Jesus used on
the Passover.
On the Passover. Yeah. So when I first heard that the East uses leavened, I was curious about that. Why does the East use leavened versus unleavened, and does it make a difference? I guess theologically, I guess.
Well, there was a whole Azamite controversy over this that took place, and the using of unleavened bread was to be a Judaizer because you were taking in the old rules of the Jews. So
I haven't heard that before. Yeah. Interesting.
And there's some evidence that unleavened bread was commonly used even in the early church. So I mean, it didn't need to be a controversy, but there has been one. Yeah.
But the leavened bread, the yeast, of course, symbolizes the good yeast of Christ rather than the bad leaven of the Pharisees, right? And the rising of the bread symbolizes the rising of Christ and the resurrection. The East tends to be a little more resurrection focused, and that's like, aside from the liturgy, aside from the practices, the biggest difference that I see, having attended both East and West, is one of nuance and one of focus. And that's what's so beautiful about our Catholic faith. There's so much, we have such a deep, rich tradition that you can validly put focus on the same element, just like with leavened or unleavened bread, and you can have a focus hearkening back to Passover or looking forward to resurrection. Both are equally valid, and there are so many choice points there throughout not only the liturgy but all of theology, where there are different focuses. We will have most of the time the processional. There's the most processional crosses. I'm not sure about ours. Heath, you've seen it up close, but a lot of the Eastern processional crosses will have one with Jesus on one side and
resurrected
one without for the resurrection, or we'll have, oddly enough, I saw one where you could actually remove Jesus from the corpus, from the cross, right, to symbolize the resurrection.
Yeah, and kind of tied into all of this too, into liturgy as well. We forgot the liturgy of the pre-sanctified gifts. This is another liturgy that we actually have, and I think in the West, like on Good Friday, there's no consecration of the host. in the West. That's correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so in the East, there's no consecration except on Sundays, which are still a celebration in Pascha or in Easter. And so during the week, usually Mondays or Wednesdays and Fridays, I believe, there's what's called the liturgy of the pre-sanctified gifts. So there's extra sanctified during the liturgy on Sunday. And then this is where a lot of the prostrations are during Lent, during the service. A lot of the prayers, there's incensing of all four of the altars, along with this beautiful chant of "Let my prayer rise to you like incense." I mean, if you can, during your Lent, take time to come to a Byzantine Catholic liturgy of the pre-sanctified.
Oh my goodness! Please do that.
It is so beautiful.
Oh, Lent is a great time, and especially Holy Week is a great time to visit the Eastern Church. I mean, if you want to feel like you're there in the upper room, and I know feelings aren't everything, and I get that, but man, when I go to the Byzantine Catholic Church, I feel like I'm huddled in that upper room. It's first century Jerusalem, and I'm there with the apostles. You really do get that sense. And here's the thing, at Catholic Mass and at Catholic Divine Liturgy, we really are there. It's not just a trick of the mind or whatever. I mean, we're mystically present at the Last Supper and at the crucifixion. And you really do get, like I said, a sense of that at the Byzantine Church. And not to say that you don't at the West, but it's a great time to visit. I'll just put it to you that way.
Well, as me and Heath have talked, and I am in nowhere capable of talking about it, but the East and West have a different spirituality, and James was speaking to that to a certain extent as well. Speaking of liturgy, I meant to ask this earlier, and since you brought that up, I've noticed in the past that I was like, well, I'd like to, I went to Mass on Sunday with my family to our Latin Mass, and I'm like, maybe this week for daily Mass I'll go to St. John Chrysostom, but I don't ever really see weekly Mass at the Eastern churches. And this may be stupid what I'm about to say, so correct me if it's wrong. But what I have at least been told is one reason they don't have weekly Mass is because in the Eastern Church, the priests are allowed to marry. So for people that don't know, the Eastern priests are allowed to marry. So hearkening back again to the Old Testament and the priests, where they had to abstain from marital relations before their service at the temple, the same concept is there. So in the West, we can have daily Mass every day because our priests are not married and they don't engage in the marital act. So they were always prepared in that sense.
Interesting.
To offer Mass, where in the East, they have to at least abstain from the marital act on Saturday, so they are prepared to offer Divine Liturgy on Sunday. Is that actually accurate, or is there more to it?
Yeah, correct. Wow. Yeah, I mean, there's probably more to it as well too. And it may just be, history, because I don't know, like Father Elias wasn't offering daily liturgy before, was he, Heath? I mean, I don't know.
So there would be special feast days during the week times.
Right.
So, yeah, no.
But it's just not. It just wasn't the practice of the East to have daily Mass. There isn't the requirement for priests to celebrate either privately or publicly on a daily basis. It just didn't develop. We had a different code of canon law, and there are just some slight differences there.
That's so interesting. I never would have thought about that, but I do think, here's what I like about the Eastern and the Western Church together. I think fulfill a complementarity of, like we were talking about, the whole of salvation history. It's Old Testament and New Testament. You really can't do one without the other. And so I think the East and West spiritualities, when you take them together, really do give a sense of complementarity. Christ's human nature, Christ's divine nature, the Old Testament and the New Testament. We were once separated, and now we are perfectly united to Christ by virtue of his sacrifice on Calvary. And I that's always what just blown me away as to how the Eastern Church opened that up for me. And it still does to this very day. I'm constantly finding out new things about Eastern rites and things that help me illuminate what's going on in the Western Church. Believe it or not, I see parallels, and through, both in history and in terms of liturgical development. So if you've never been to one, and I think the Ruthenian Catholic Rite is the easiest to find a parish. At least it's been that way in my experience.
In the U.S., I'm pretty certain that we're the largest, and there's like, I don't know, a few thousand, of us. There's a handful. There's not parishes in every state. A good friend of mine who is finishing up a diaconate program, he is in a position where, even though he's Ruthenian, the only parish that's available to him is a Melkite parish. So he's got to get both bishops to talk to each other and like figure out how to get him ordained and get him serving there because he can't move. So it can be challenging. It's not going to be available. It's not going to be an option for everyone. And people do drive quite a ways out of the way. I've been fortunate to have lived very close to Ruthenian parishes at multiple places that I've lived. It's just like, I don't know, it's probably just a God thing.
Yeah. Sorry. No, go ahead. I interrupt you. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that the interesting thing about liturgy is that our faith is so massive and deep, like the ocean, right? You can just keep going and going and feel like you've never explored it all. But it's made me realize, because I had a problem with, I had a struggle with the Novus Ordo for a while myself. And thanks be to God, I got over my stubbornness, right? But one of the things that has, that I've seen in participating in different liturgies is that there isn't one liturgy that is even capable of capturing it all. And so there are different shades and there are different things that God has to reveal to us each individually and to different groups of people and throughout different times that aren't just captured by one liturgy. That's why I love having variety in the liturgy, because it just highlights the depth and the breadth of the church.
Absolutely.
I feel like that's why God told Noah to go out and fill up the earth. You have all your different cultures, and they all express, different aspects of this thing that all of humanity together can't even express.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
And sometimes we get stuck in our culture, and especially as Americans, we're as modern day Americans are quite guilty of this. I've noticed that, with my job, because I travel internationally, that we kind of get stuck in what we think the way things should be done. And if it's not, this is weird or it's wrong. And it's a hard mindset to overcome. But I think we have that mindset sometimes too, at least in the West, of the liturgies. We're like, this is the liturgy and this is it, the Latin liturgy. And it's not, because like you were saying, James, it just, when you go to these other liturgies, you see that, hey, there is a lot more out there in a good way that God has revealed to us through the liturgy, because the liturgy teaches, right? So, you talk about some of the Marian dogmas, and some of the justifications for them was the fact that there was early liturgies, like talk about the Assumption, I think 4th, 5th centuries, they can go far back and find there were liturgies for the Dormation of the Virgin Mary, or the Assumption, whatever you want to call it. So the liturgy speaks to the faith of the church as well, and that teaches us the faith. And that's why it's important, especially with children, and I know I harp on this show sometimes, that's why it's important for our kids to see good liturgy.
Yeah, man. Here.
Yeah.
I mean, and my last point, we're coming up on an hour and a half, and this is a good place to sort of wind everything down, is if you want to go to a Catholic parish where they're going to talk about the Blessed Virgin Mary, go to a Byzantine Catholic Church.
Oh my gosh.
I mean,
Yeah.
I remember the first time I heard in the Great Litany, the Great Litany closes with calling to mind our most holy, most pure, most blessed and glorious Lady, the Mother of God and ever Virgin Mary. And let us commend ourselves and one another and our whole lives unto Christ our God.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, I tell you what, I was like, I'm with these people. These guys get it.
Whatever they're about.
Tell me about the role that because you really can't overstate it. The role that the Virgin Mary plays in Eastern Christian spirituality. I can tell you it is a bigger role than she plays even in the West.
Yeah.
No
question. Well, the icon you showed earlier is like that pretty much says it all, and which is good because icons say a lot more than you can easily say in words, right? But it's right there behind you have Mary right there behind the altar, and in the center of the parish is Mary, and in the center of Mary is Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And she is the one who brings him to us. She is the reason that we are able to have him and have relationship with God. And that is just like, is so central to the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom. And I don't want to go down a rabbit trail, but it's funny when I hear, people will say like, or even Orthodox or people who aren't Orthodox will say that, well, Catholics have all these doctrines about Mary. I'm like, dude, you don't even understand. Like, you're more Mary. Like, if you're talking to a Western Rite, a Latin Rite Catholic, you're more Marian even than the Latin Rite Catholic with the dogmas, right?
Oh, I had an Orthodox.
We really disagree on them anyways.
I had a Russian Orthodox priest ask me one time because I went to look at some of the icons that he had in his basement. Now, this was actually a really
tell
cool
that story. Yeah, tell that story.
Well, I was taking an art appreciation class at my undergraduate institution, Loyola University in Chicago. Go Ramblers! And I decided I wanted to look. They had this Russian Orthodox church outside Russia, which is not the same as the Russian Orthodox Church.
Yeah,
everybody's in schism over there, over in the East. But anyway, they had this church in Chicago, and I went to visit because I wanted to look at the icons. And the priest, he says, "Hey, if you want to see some really cool icons, come into the basement. Let me show you what we got." We go down into the basement, and he had just stacks of icons that were liberated from the communists.
Oh, wow.
And made their way to Chicago. And he was telling me, we've repatriated some of them, but there are some of them I will never let go of. And I got to see some of them. Some of them were they looked like the surface of this iPhone. You couldn't even see the icon because they were just black with soot.
Yes.
From just generations of incense, and if you looked really closely, you could see an image of our Lord. But I had this same Orthodox priest. He once asked me. He says, I understand you guys over in the Latin Church. You've got the statues of the saints and everything, and he says, I get that, but how you could ever make a statue of our Lord or Our Lady? How you could ever make the statues, they're so sexually voluptuous. Why would you do that? That was his thing. His thing was that three-dimensional statues are not appropriate because they're too sexually voluptuous. But he just could not fathom how we would dare to make a statue of the Virgin. I mean, such was their level of respect and love for the Mother of God that you make only icons of her. I just thought that was kind of an interesting takeaway that was the thing that bothered him.
And then you have those who say you make nothing of the Virgin Mary or God.
Right, yeah, or God, yeah. But no, I have always been just really impressed with the way that the Eastern churches treat Our Lady and give her just that respect that I believe is due to the Mother of God who prays for us every day. So.
Yeah, I would just want to say here to close too, is just like, you're welcome to come anytime. Come check it out. It's so hard to explain it like in words. It's something you almost just have to experience.
Absolutely.
And if you're a Catholic, come on in and you can receive, and it could fulfill your obligation, all that kind of stuff, you know.
And if you're not a Catholic, come on in,
warm.
but don't go to communion, but just come on in and talk to some people.
Well,
Exactly.
yeah, and you know, there is actually, we could go on for hours talking about just this one rite within the church. I think we highlighted the major points, and we didn't even get into the filioque controversy. Filioque controversy.
Right.
I mean, we could solve it tonight if you guys want. But no, I mean, one of the cool things too is, you know, obviously that was part of the Great Schism. Well, when they came in communion with Rome, they were not forced in putting the filioque into their creed, correct? So when I've been there, that is absent. But with that aside, like I said, I mean, there is so much that we could talk about. We haven't even touched the surface. And if you're interested in it, do like he said, the visit Ruthenian, or as we call them in the U.S., mainly the Byzantine Catholic churches. I know they're not everywhere, but there are still quite a few of them. So, yeah, check it out.
Yeah,
James,
and you may have to ask around. It's getting better, but we do tend to be Catholics. Tend to be terrible with technology. We tend to be like 20 years behind, and the Eastern rites are about another 20 years behind that in many cases. So you may
go to our
have to check around
page. Yeah,
yeah.
Did you say MySpace? Tom is not going to be happy with this.
I was just lamenting on the last episode I did where I was talking about the 60-year anniversary of the Second Vatican Council, and I was just saying that Inter Mirifica, which is the Second Vatican Council's document on engagement with social media, or not social media, social communication, mass media.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I thought, you know, it's because my deal is, it's not that I have a beef with Vatican II necessarily, but it's just that the world evolved beyond 1965 a little bit. I mean, and in here in Inter Mirifica, in this document that is the Second Vatican Council's statement on how the Catholic Church engages with media in the modern world, the word internet literally doesn't appear. And why the heck would it? It's in 1965. Can you imagine trying to talk about what media means in 2022 and not using the word internet? I don't even know how you would do that. So that was an interesting thing that I brought up in my last episode. But no, I know what you mean. Catholics are getting better at it. And actually, I've noticed that if you Google Byzantine Catholic Church and then your area, you'll typically come up with something. I mean, Google Maps has usually got a pretty good.
We've practically blown up online. I mean, comparatively speaking, over the last 5 to 7 years, I think. St. John Chrysostom, our website is decent, and it's actually updated, which is the biggest thing.
I'll put a link in the description for those of you from the Houston area.
We stream live every Sunday, and there are other parishes that stream live on Sunday as well too. There's Father Thomas Loya's parish. It's an Annunciation. I think he's got the Light of the East podcast, right? So we're starting to make some traction, and there are some notable people who are kind of like coming east as well too. Trent Horn goes to St. Basil's, Matt Fradd, Michael Lofton was mentioned earlier, and so there's an attraction, and it's getting people interested. I think that I've been saying this for a while, but I think that the Eastern rites are perfectly positioned for the new evangelization in a way that has an advantage over the West in a way that the West does not, because we're a little bit more out of step. We're different. It does make people who have left the church or who have never been Catholic, it makes people curious. Like, oh, what is this? This is different. What is this?
Well, your hierarchy isn't infested with modernists that are dug in like ticks. That's a huge step in the right direction.
Yeah, it helps.
That does help.
I do know that if there's an Eastern parish nearby, like no matter if I'm chatting with somebody online, on the other side of the country, I'm confident that if they have an Eastern Rite parish nearby, I can tell them to go there and ask Father and ask somebody to guide them. And I'm pretty confident that will go just fine. It's not, unfortunately, that's not always the case with the.
Well, I know that the Orthodox. I know that the Orthodox are making gains amongst young people, and I think the only reason we're not seeing that from the Byzantine Catholics is just exposure. I think that's literally what it is, and hopefully, if God can look past our deficiencies and use this little podcast to reach somebody who's interested, then that will have been a good day.
Amen.
James, Heath, I want to thank you guys so much. It's an hour and 30 minutes, and I've got to go to bed for sure because I got a big day tomorrow. But I want to thank you guys for coming on the show with us and talking about this with us. And be assured of our prayers, and hopefully you guys will continue to pray for us. Jason, any last thoughts?
No, just thank you, James and Heath. I appreciate y'all's time and insight. Me and Mark were going to try to do this episode by ourselves, but I don't think it would have been as rich and been as good without you guys and your insight from sitting in the pews from Sunday to Sunday, whereas we go occasionally.
Yeah, and hopefully we can have you guys back on to talk about maybe some other topics or something like that. We're big on having repeat guests. So.
Yeah, I would love to. Thank you so much.
Our bench is not that deep, James. I'm going to be honest with you. But I want to thank everybody for joining us, and definitely thanks James and Heath. I want to thank my co-host Jason for coming back to me, man. I had to do that 60th anniversary of Vatican II episode, and I hated doing it by myself.
Well, I had to do a lot of praying because I was like, I don't know if I like Mark anymore.
That's fair. That's fair.
No,
I'll be honest. I'm impressed that you waited a year before figuring that out. Yeah, because most people get to that point in like 2 or 3 months. So
no, like you said, I had a throat issues when you did that, and then before that, I'd been traveling and just we've mentioned before, we're just two lay people with families and jobs.
Life gets in the way.
Gets in the way sometimes, but we do the best we can.
Y'all need to send us some. Y'all need to go buy some merch. Link in the description so Jason and I can quit our jobs and do this full time. Thanks, guys, for coming on. And remember, like I always say, life is hard, but it's harder when you don't pray the rosary. God bless everybody.
God bless.